The tremor started 3 months ago. Just a slight vibration in his fingertips at first, easy to dismiss, easy to hide beneath leather gloves and folded arms. General Alistair Thorne had spent 20 years building a reputation carved from stone, and stone does not shake. But now, alone in his private quarters with the midnight hour stretching long and the fire burning low, he watches his hand hover above the desk and sees the truth he cannot outrun. The tremor is worse. His fingers dance like leaves in wind, betraying the man who has never once betrayed his country. He clenches his fist until the knuckles whiten. The shaking stops, but only for a moment. Only until he relaxes. Then it returns, patient and relentless, like an enemy he cannot outmaneuver. Outside these walls, the Empire sees a legend. They see the hero of the Black Ridge campaign, the strategist who crushed 3 uprisings without losing a single battalion, the commander whose very name sends fear through enemy lines and pride through every soldier who wears the uniform. They see iron and discipline and unwavering strength. They do not see this. They cannot see this. Alistair rises from his chair and walks to the window. The capital spreads below him, a tapestry of lights and shadows, millions of lives resting easy because men like him stand guard. He has given everything to this city, this empire, this life. His youth. His marriage. His chance at something ordinary and warm and human. And now it wants his dignity too. The door opens behind him. He does not turn. He knows the footsteps, the careful hesitation, the way they pause exactly 2 steps into the room out of respect for his space. "Sir," comes the voice of Colonel Marks, his aide of 7 years. The medical board has submitted their final report. Alistair closes his eyes. "Read it." Marks clears his throat. The rustle of paper fills the silence. After extensive evaluation, the board finds no physiological cause for the tremor. All tests are negative. They recommend a full psychological review and immediate leave of absence from active command. The words hang in the air like smoke. Leave of absence. They might as well say public execution. In the world Alistair inhabits, absence is weakness, and weakness is death. Not physical death, but something worse. The death of relevance. The death of fear in the hearts of your enemies. The death of the man everyone believes you to be. And if I refuse? Alistair asks, still facing the window. The board will have no choice but to escalate the matter to the council. "Sir, if they rule you unfit and you resist, it becomes a public proceeding." The newspapers would. Would what, Colonel? Tell the truth? That their great general can no longer hold a pen steady enough to sign his own name. His voice remains calm, controlled, but there is something beneath it now. Something that sounds almost human. Mark says nothing. There is nothing to say. Alistair turns. In the low firelight, his face reveals nothing. 45 years old, and his features could have been carved from the same stone as his reputation. Sharp cheekbones, a jaw that has clenched through countless battles, eyes the color of winter sky that have seen too much and forgiven too little. But his hand, hanging at his side, trembles like a leaf in autumn wind. "The Empire cannot know," Alistair says quietly. "If they know I am weakened, every border we hold becomes a target. Every treaty we've signed becomes negotiation. Every soldier who follows me loses faith." He pauses. "I will not be the reason good men die." Mark steps forward, his own face tight with concern. He is younger, barely 40, with the earnest loyalty of a man who has never had to hide who he is. "Sir, there must be another way. Private physicians, specialists from the outer provinces, someone who can." There is no one. Alistair moves toward his desk, each step measured and deliberate. "I've consulted every specialist within 1,000 miles. They all say the same thing. My body is healthy. My mind is sound. The tremor has no origin they can find." He sits, and the chair groans beneath him like it knows the weight it carries. "Then what do we do?" Marks asks. The question hangs between them, heavy and unwelcome. Alistair has spent his entire life answering questions, solving problems, finding paths through impossible terrain. But this enemy has no flank to turn, no weakness to exploit. It lives inside him, patient and growing, waiting for the moment he can no longer hide. There is one name, Alistair says slowly. I received a letter 3 weeks ago. A physician from the Eastern Districts. She claimed to have experience with cases like mine. Unorthodox methods, she wrote. Holistic approaches the military board would never approve. Marx frowns. Then why haven't you? Because her name is Alara Vance. Alistair watches his aide's face change, recognition flickering across his features. And you know what happened 5 years ago. Everyone knows what happened 5 years ago. Dr. Alara Vance had been the chief physician at the capital's largest military hospital, respected, brilliant, and utterly dedicated to her patients. Then came the scandal. A high-ranking officer under her care had died unexpectedly, and though the official inquiry cleared her of wrongdoing, rumors spread like wildfire. Favoritism. Incompetence. An affair with the patient that compromised her judgment. The officer's family had wealth and influence. They destroyed her reputation with the quiet efficiency of those who know how power works. She disappeared from the capital, retreated to a small clinic in the Eastern Districts, and the world forgot about Alara Vance. Until now. She's brilliant, Alistair continues. Everyone who worked with her said so. The scandal was manufactured, the charges baseless. She was simply too good, too dedicated, and too unwilling to play politics. They broke her because they could. And you believe she can help you? Alistair looks down at his hand, still trembling against the dark wood of his desk. I believe she's the only person who hasn't told me I'm imagining this. The only one who didn't dismiss it as stress or age or weakness of will. In her letter, she describes symptoms I haven't told anyone. Details I've kept hidden even from you. Marx is quiet for a long moment. Sir, if you meet with her privately, if anyone finds out, the scandal would be devastating. Her reputation, attached to yours, the old rumors would resurface. The council would use it against you. I know. If they discover you sought her out, they'll say it proves instability. Poor judgment. They'll say. I know what they'll say. Alistair's voice sharpens, and for a moment he sounds like the general the world knows. But tell me, Colonel, what is the alternative? I step down quietly, disappear into some estate in the countryside, and wait for the tremor to take everything else at once? I watch from the shadows while lesser men lead soldiers who deserve better. He stands again, unable to remain still. The fire crackles behind him, casting long shadows across the room. Or I fight, he says. I fight the only way I know how. I find the person who might save me, even if the world says I shouldn't. Even if every instinct screams that this is dangerous. Even if it costs me everything in the end. Mark studies his commander, this man he has served for 7 years, this man he has never once seen uncertain or afraid. But now, in the flickering firelight, he sees something new. Something that looks almost like hope, buried deep beneath the stone. When do you want me to arrange it? Marx asks quietly. Alistair meets his eyes. Tonight. Send a message to her clinic. Tell her I accept her offer. Tell her. He pauses, searching for words that don't exist. Tell her I'll come to her. No guards, no official record, no one else present. If this fails, it fails in private. And if it succeeds? Alistair looks down at his hand once more. For just a moment, the trembling seems to ease, as if the decision itself has brought some small measure of peace. If it succeeds, he says, no one can ever know. The journey east takes 3 days. Alistair travels alone, without uniform, without announcement, without any of the trappings that usually accompany his movements. He is just a man now, riding through countryside still waking from winter's grip, watching farmers tend fields and children chase dogs and ordinary people live ordinary lives. He has never felt more foreign to himself. The clinic sits at the edge of a small town, a modest building of weathered stone and clean white trim. A garden grows in front, dormant now but clearly tended with care. He ties his horse and stands at the gate, suddenly uncertain. This is the moment. This is the line. He has crossed battlefields without hesitation. He has walked into enemy camps under flag of truce. He has faced death more times than he can count and never once paused at the threshold. But this small gate, this simple garden path, this ordinary door, they feel like something else entirely. He opens the gate. The door opens before he reaches it. And standing there, framed by warm light and the scent of herbs, is a woman who looks at him not with awe, fear, or calculation, but with something he hasn't seen in years. Understanding. General Thorne, Alara Vance says quietly, "I've been waiting for you." She steps aside, and he walks into the unknown. The room is nothing like the sterile examination chambers Alistair has endured for months. No cold metal tables, no harsh overhead lights, no rows of gleaming instruments laid out like weapons. Instead, warm wood panels the walls. Bookshelves overflow with worn volumes and dried plants hang from ceiling beams. A fire crackles in a stone hearth, and two armchairs face each other across a low table. It looks like a sitting room, a home, a place where people lower their guard. Alistair keeps his raised. "Sit, please." Alara gestures to one of the chairs, then takes the other herself. She wears no white coat, no uniform of any kind. Simple clothing, practical and warm. Her dark hair is pulled back, revealing a face that holds both intelligence and something softer beneath. She is younger than he expected, perhaps 35, with eyes that miss nothing. He sits. His hands rest on his knees, and he forces them still through sheer will. The effort costs him, but he has spent a lifetime learning to hide weakness. "You traveled alone," she observes. "No escort, no staff. That's either very brave or very foolish. Which do you think it is?" "I think you have no one left to trust." She says it simply, without cruelty. The military physicians failed you. Your superiors want you quietly retired. Your enemies wait for any sign of weakness. And your friends. She pauses. Your friends don't know how to help. Alistair studies her, this woman who speaks truth strangers usually dance around. "You read my file." "I read the official file. The one that says nothing useful." She leans forward, and something shifts in her expression. "But I also read between the lines. 20 years of command without defeat. 3 major campaigns. Countless smaller actions. And never, not once, did you take leave after any of them. You went from battle to battle, crisis to crisis, without stopping. Is that relevant?" "Everything is relevant." She stands and moves to a small cabinet against the wall. The body keeps score, General, even when the mind refuses to. She returns with 2 cups and a pot of tea, pouring slowly, deliberately. "When did the tremor start?" 3 months ago." "And what happened 3 months and 1 week ago?" The question lands like a blade. Alistair's jaw tightens. He reaches for the tea, more to occupy his hands than from thirst, and the tremor betrays him. Tea slushes over the rim. Heat stings his fingers. He sets the cup down hard, frustration burning through his carefully maintained control. "That would be the anniversary," Alara says softly, "of the Black Ridge campaign." He looks up sharply. "I told you. I read between the lines." She settles back into her chair, cradling her own cup. "Black Ridge was 7 years ago. A decisive victory. You crushed an enemy force 3 times your size, secured the mountain passes, and became a legend. But legends always have a cost." Alistair says nothing. His hand has resumed its trembling, worse now, as if her words have unlocked something he kept chained. 300 of your soldiers died at Black Ridge," she continues. "The official reports called it acceptable losses. Necessary sacrifices. But you carried every one of them off that mountain yourself, didn't you? After the fighting ended. After your officers told you to rest. You spent 3 days bringing home the dead." The fire crackles between them. Outside, wind brushes against the windows. Alistair stares at his trembling hand as if seeing it for the first time. "I never spoke of that," he says quietly. "You didn't have to. The body keeps score." She sets down her tea. "The tremor isn't a disease, General. It's a debt. Your body demanding payment for years of ignoring what you carry. The grief, the guilt, the weight of every decision that sent men to die. You've been storing it in your bones, and now your bones are full. He should leave. He should stand, walk out, mount his horse, and ride back to the capital where things make sense. This woman speaks in riddles and metaphors, offering nothing concrete, nothing a soldier can hold and use. But he doesn't move. Can you stop it? He asks. I can teach you to stop it yourself. But it won't be quick, and it won't be easy, and it won't look like anything the military board would approve. She meets his eyes. My methods require touch. Prolonged, intimate contact. Physical therapy that releases what the body has trapped. If anyone discovers what we do here, in this room, your career ends and my freedom likely follows. Alistair understands now. The scandal, the destroyed reputation, the whispers that drove her from the capital. She didn't cross lines with that officer. She simply touched him, the way she's proposing to touch Alistair, and someone decided that was worse than any bullet wound. And if I agree, then we begin. And we keep it secret. Completely. No records, no witnesses, no one else ever knowing what happens between these walls. She holds his gaze. Because the world will never understand. And the world will never forgive. The first session nearly breaks him. She has him remove his shirt and lie face down on a padded table near the fire. Her hands are warm, surprisingly strong, and when they first press against the muscles of his back, he flinches like a startled horse. Breathe, she instructs. Don't fight it. But fighting is what he does. Fighting is who he is. Every instinct screams at him to rise, to defend, to maintain the walls that have kept him alive through decades of war and politics and loss. Her hands move against his skin, finding knots he didn't know existed, pressing into places that ache with something older than muscle. And then she finds the scar. It runs along his left shoulder blade, a souvenir from his first command, when he was young and foolish and took a blade meant for one of his men. She pauses there, fingers tracing its length, and something shifts in the room. This one, she says quietly. This one carries more than the others. He doesn't answer. Can't answer. His jaw is clamped shut, his eyes closed, his entire body rigid with the effort of staying still. She continues working, moving lower, finding each place where violence left its mark. There are many. More than even he remembers. And with each touch, something strange begins to happen. The tension doesn't just ease. It releases. Like water breaking through a dam, years of held breath and clenched teeth and swallowed screams begin to flow out of him. Not in words, he will never speak these things aloud, but in the involuntary shudder of muscles finally allowed to relax, in the deepening of his breath, in the quiet surrender of a body that has guarded too much for too long. When she finishes, he doesn't move. Can't move. He lies there, face turned away from her, and for the first time in 7 years, the tremor in his hands is completely still. You can rest, she says softly. I'll be here when you wake. He should refuse. Should rise, dress, return to the inn where he's staying, maintain the distance this arrangement requires. But sleep pulls at him like a tide, warm and irresistible, and before he can form the words of refusal, he is gone. He wakes to darkness and the scent of wood smoke. The fire has burned low. A blanket covers him, soft and warm. For a long moment, he doesn't move, doesn't remember where he is or why. Then he hears her breathing. She sits in the armchair near the hearth, a book open in her lap, her face soft in the firelight. She hasn't left. Hasn't woken him. Has simply waited, keeping watch over a sleeping soldier like he was something worth protecting. He has never had that. Not once in his entire life. You stayed, he says, his voice rough with sleep. She looks up, and something passes across her features. Not pity. He knows pity, has seen it in every physician's eyes for months. Something else. Something that looks almost like recognition. You needed someone to. She closes the book. How do you feel? He sits up slowly, the blanket pulling at his waist. The firelight plays across his bare chest, illuminating scars she now knows by touch. He flexes his hand, watches it remain steady, and feels something crack open in his chest. Better, he admits. Different. That's the first step. She rises and moves toward him, but stops at a careful distance. respectful, professional. We'll need many sessions. The body releases slowly, in layers. Each time we meet, you'll feel more, remember more, and eventually, you'll learn to release it yourself. He nods, not trusting his voice. There's something else. She hesitates, and for the first time, he sees uncertainty in her. The more we do this, the harder it becomes to maintain distance. For both of us. Touch like this. It creates bonds, connections. You'll start to feel things for me that aren't appropriate for a patient and physician. And you? She meets his eyes. I already do. The words hang between them, dangerous and true. Alistair should end this now. Should thank her, pay her, ride away and never return. Should protect them both from whatever waits down this path. But his hand is steady. His chest feels lighter than it has in years. And for the first time since he can remember, he doesn't feel alone. Tomorrow, he says quietly. Same time. She nods, and something in her eyes says she knew he would. The sessions become his lifeline. He returns each day, shedding the general at her door, becoming simply a man who needs what only she can give. Her hands work miracles his words cannot describe. She finds the places where grief is calcified into pain and presses until it flows again, until he can breathe again, until the tremor fades and something like peace takes its place. But she was right about the bond. He catches himself watching her when she isn't looking, noticing the way firelight catches in her hair, the small sound she makes when concentrating, the warmth in her voice when she asks about his day. He starts to crave these hours not just for the healing, but for her. And she watches him too. In unguarded moments, he finds her gaze on him, soft and knowing. She doesn't look away when caught. Doesn't pretend. Just holds his eyes with that same steady understanding, as if she sees all of him, the general, the soldier, the man, and finds none of it wanting. They don't speak of it. Can't speak of it. The words would make it real, and real is dangerous. But every session brings them closer to the edge. On the 7th day, she asks him to stay for dinner. It's innocent. Practical. The snow has started falling, thick and relentless, and the ride back to town would be miserable. She has food enough for two. He can sleep by the fire and return in the morning. He says yes. And somewhere between the soup and the bread and the easy conversation that feels nothing like the careful diplomacy of his usual life, Alistair realizes he has crossed a line he can never uncross. He doesn't want to leave. Not just tonight. Ever. Alistair told himself he stayed because the roads were impassable. Told himself it was practicality, necessity, the simple logic of survival. But lying by the fire each night, listening to the soft sounds of Alara moving in the room above, he knew the truth. He stayed because leaving felt impossible. They fell into a rhythm that mimicked something he'd never had. Mornings together over tea, her asking gentle questions about his past, his campaigns, the men he'd lost. Afternoons of therapy that grew deeper, more intimate, as her hands found new places where grief had hidden. Evenings by the fire, reading, or talking, or simply sharing silence that felt like conversation. On the 3rd night, during a lull in the storm, she asked the question he'd been dreading. What happens when you go back? He stared into the flames. I resume command. I pretend these weeks never happened. I become the general again. And us. The word landed between them like a stone in still water. Us. Such a small word for something so large. There is no us, he said quietly. There can't be. You know that. She nodded, but something in her face closed. Not anger. Alara didn't do anger. Something Gongshang resignation. Like she'd always known this moment would come and had simply been waiting for it to arrive. Then we should make the most of the time we have left. She rose from her chair and crossed to where he sat today. For a long moment, she stood above him, firelight painting gold across her features. Then she knelt, took his face in her hands, and kissed him. Alistair had faced death without flinching. Had walked into enemy fire, negotiated with warlords, endured torture in a foreign prison. But nothing in his life had prepared him for the feeling of Alara Vance's lips against his, for the way the world fell away and left only this moment, only this woman, only the terrifying truth that he loved her. He pulled back, breathing hard. We can't. I know. Her eyes were wet, but her voice stayed steady. But we can have tonight. One night that no one ever knows about. One memory to carry through whatever comes next. He should have refused. Should have been the general, the commander, the man who always did what was right instead of what he wanted. Instead, he pulled her close. He left at dawn. The roads had cleared enough for travel, and staying another hour would have broken him completely. She stood in the doorway as he mounted his horse, wrapped in a blanket against the cold, her face unreadable. "Will you come back?" she asked. He wanted to say yes. Wanted to promise her the world, to throw aside everything he'd built and simply stay. But he was still the general, and the general had responsibilities that stretched far beyond one woman's heart. "When I can," he said. "When it's safe." She nodded, and he saw her understand what he couldn't say. Safe might never come. Safe might be a luxury neither of them could afford. He rode away without looking back. If he had looked back, he would have stayed. The capital welcomed him like a returning hero. Within days, he was submerged in briefings, strategy sessions, the endless machinery of empire. Officers saluted with renewed respect. Politicians sought his counsel. The tremor, still quiet since Alara's treatments, allowed him to move through these worlds without fear of exposure. But he moved through them hollow. Every night, alone in his quarters, he replayed those 3 days. Her voice, her touch, the way she'd looked at him that final morning. He wrote letters he never sent, composed speeches he never delivered, imagined a life that could never exist. And somewhere in the machinery of the capital, someone was watching. Colonel Marks noticed first. Not the affair. Alistair was too careful for that. But the change in his commander, the subtle softening around the edges, the way he sometimes stared into middle distance with an expression Marks had never seen before. "You seem different, sir," Marks observed one evening, as they reviewed troop deployments. "Better. The treatments must be working." Alistair kept his face neutral. "They are." "Will you continue seeing her?" The question was innocent, professional, but something in Marks's tone made Alistair look up sharply. His aide's expression gave nothing away, but there was a new carefulness in his eyes, a watchfulness that hadn't been there before. "When necessary," Alistair said. "No more than that." Marks nodded and returned to the maps, but Alistair felt the shift, the tiny crack in the foundation of trust they'd built over 7 years. Marks suspected something, and suspicion, left unchecked, became certainty. The second observer was more dangerous. Councillor Van arrived unannounced 3 weeks after Alistair's return. A thin man with eyes like winter ice, Van chaired the Military Oversight Committee and had spent years waiting for Alistair to slip. They'd clashed over strategy, over resources, over the very nature of how wars should be fought. Van favoured caution and calculation. Alistair believed in action and honour. Their rivalry was the capital's worst-kept secret. "General." Van stood in the doorway of Alistair's office, uninvited and unwelcome. "I heard you were unwell. I came to offer my concerns personally." "I'm perfectly well, Councillor. As you can see." "Can I?" Van stepped inside, circling slowly like a predator testing prey. "I also heard you took an unscheduled journey recently. East, I believe. To a small town with a very interesting physician." Alistair felt ice crawl down his spine, but his face revealed nothing. "I visited several physicians. The board recommended a second opinion." "Of course they did." Van smiled, thin and cold. "And this particular physician, Dr. Vance, I believe, she was quite helpful." "She was thorough." "I'm sure she was." Van stopped before Alistair's desk, looking down with the satisfaction of a man holding cards he hadn't yet played. "You know her history, of course. The scandal, the death, the questions about her relationship with that officer. Some might say seeking her out shows questionable judgment." Alistair rose slowly, letting his full height and presence fill the space between them. "Some might say concerning themselves with my medical choices shows questionable priorities. Is there a point to this visit, Councillor, or are you simply practicing your interrogation techniques?" Van's smile didn't waver. Only concern, General. Pure concern. For your health, for your judgment, for the stability of the command structure we both serve. He moved toward the door, then paused. If I were you, I'd be very careful about who I trusted. Trust is a dangerous thing in our line of work. He left without waiting for a response. Alistair stood motionless for a long minute, then walked to the window and stared out at the city below. Van knew. Maybe not everything, maybe not the truth of that final night, but enough. Enough to watch. Enough to wait. Enough to strike when the moment served him best. Alara was no longer just a secret. She was a weapon pointed at his throat. He should have stopped. Should have cut all contact, burned the letters, buried those 3 days so deep that even he couldn't find them. But the thought of never hearing her voice again, never seeing her face, never feeling her hands on his skin, that thought was worse than any threat Van could make. So he continued, but carefully. Messages passed through trusted channels, innocent on their surface but carrying meaning only she would understand. He sent funds for her clinic, books he thought she'd like, small tokens that said what words couldn't. She replied with pressed flowers, recipes, observations about the changing seasons that he read and reread until he knew them by heart. They planned one meeting. Just one. A remote inn halfway between the capital and her town, where no one would know them, where they could steal a few hours from a world that wanted them apart. It was reckless. Foolish. Everything a man in his position should never do. He went anyway. The inn was small and quiet, tucked into a fold of hills that seemed forgotten by time. She arrived first, waiting in a corner booth with a fire crackling nearby. When he walked in, when their eyes met across the room, he felt something in his chest crack open all over again. They didn't speak at first. Just held each other in the shadows of that small space, breathing each other in, memorizing the feel of being together. "I've missed you," she whispered against his chest. "I know. I'm sorry." "Don't be sorry. Just hold me. For as long as we have." They took a room upstairs. Not for what you might think, though that too, in time, but simply to be alone, to talk without fear, to exist for a few hours as ordinary people instead of a general and a disgraced physician carrying a love that could destroy them both. She told him about her clinic, her patients, the small satisfactions of a life reduced from its former ambitions. He told her about the capital, about Van's visit, about the growing danger of their connection. "We should stop," he said finally, the words like broken glass in his mouth. "It's not safe for you. If Van finds proof, he'll destroy you to get to me." She was quiet for a long moment. Then she took his hand, the one that used to tremble, and pressed it to her heart. "This is what matters," she said. "This is the only thing that's ever been real. If they take everything else, they can't take this. They can't take what I feel for you." He wanted to believe her. Wanted to think love could conquer politics, could shield them from the consequences of their choices. But he'd spent too long in the world not to know the truth. Love didn't conquer anything. Love just made the losses hurt more. They parted at dawn again, same as before. She rode east, he rode west, and neither looked back because looking back would have broken what remained of their resolve. But someone was watching. From the shadow of the inn stable, a man in plain clothes noted the direction of their travel, the descriptions of their horses, the way they'd held each other one last time before mounting. He wrote it all down in a small book, then rode toward the capital with news that would change everything. His name didn't matter. He was simply another tool in Van's growing arsenal, another thread in the web tightening around Alistair Thorne. By the time Alistair reached his quarters, the report was already on Councillor Van's desk, and the world they'd tried to keep out was finally breaking in. The official inquiry began quietly, too quietly for Alistair not to notice. Summons to meetings that didn't appear on any schedule. Questions from junior officers that seemed innocent but carried hidden edges. Documents misplaced, then found, then misplaced again. The machinery of suspicion, grinding slow but grinding fine. Colonel Marks came to him on a Tuesday evening, face pale, hands unsteady. "Sir, you need to see this." The file landed on Alistair's desk like a death sentence. Inside, neatly organized and thoroughly documented, was the story of his relationship with Alara Vance. Dates, locations, descriptions, the inn, the letters, the funds transferred to her clinic. Everything except the one night that mattered most, but enough. More than enough. Where did you get this? Alistair asked, his voice dangerously calm. Councillor Van's office. A friend on his staff thought I should know. Mark swallowed hard. Sir, they're planning to present it to the council next week. They're calling for a full hearing. Questions of fitness for command, fraternization with a known scandal, misuse of position. They're calling it treason. Marks didn't deny it. Alistair stared at the file, at the evidence of his own recklessness spread across page after page. He'd been so careful, so certain he could outmaneuver the watchers. But Van was patient. Van understood that the best trap wasn't sprung until the prey had wandered deep inside. What about Dr. Vance? Alistair asked. Is she named? She's the centerpiece. They're reviving the old scandal, tying it to you. They'll claim she seduced you, compromised your judgment, turned you into a liability. Marks hesitated. Sir, they're going to destroy her. Again. Only this time, there won't be anything left to rebuild. Alistair closed the file. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he rose, walked to the window, and stared out at the city that had consumed his entire life. Arrange a meeting, he said quietly. With Van. Tomorrow. His office, his terms. Sir, you can't. I can and I will. If he wants a fight, he'll get one. But not the one he's expecting. Van received him like a spider welcoming a fly. His office occupied the corner of the council building, all polished wood and expensive art and the quiet confidence of a man who'd never lost anything he cared about. He didn't rise when Alistair entered, didn't offer a seat, didn't pretend this was anything but what it was. General, how kind of you to visit. Van gestured at the file in Alistair's hand. I see my little gift arrived. You're going to destroy an innocent woman to get to me. Van's smile was pure satisfaction. Innocent. That's not what the records show. Not what witnesses will testify. Not what the council will believe when they see proof of your entanglement. He leaned forward. You made this easy, General. All those years of perfect behavior, and then you threw it away for a woman. A disgraced physician with a dead patient in her past. Remarkable. Alistair set the file on Van's desk. What do you want? Want? I want what I've always wanted. Your position. Your influence. Your seat at the table where real decisions are made. Van spread his hands. You step down, quietly, citing health concerns. You retire to some distant estate and never return. Dr. Vance disappears back into whatever obscurity she crawled out of. And I become the new voice of military wisdom on the council. And if I refuse, then I release this file to every newspaper in the capital. I call witnesses who will describe your treatments in vivid detail. I make sure the world knows that their great general, their hero of Black Ridge, spent his nights with a woman accused of killing the man she was supposed to save. Van's eyes glittered. By the time I'm finished, she'll be in prison and you'll be a footnote. A cautionary tale about the dangers of letting heroes believe their own legends. Alistair stood motionless. The tremor had returned to his hands, but he didn't hide it. Didn't care. You have until Monday, Van said. That's when the council convenes. Bring me your resignation, and this all goes away. Try to fight, and I'll bury you both. Alistair didn't go to his quarters. He rode through the night, pushing his horse hard, reaching Alara's clinic as dawn painted the eastern sky. She opened the door in her nightclothes, hair loose, face soft with sleep that vanished the moment she saw his expression. What happened? He told her everything. The file, Van, the ultimatum. The choice that wasn't a choice at all. I won't let him destroy you, Alistair finished. I'll resign. I'll give him what he wants. And then I'll find a way to make this right, somehow, someday. Alara was quiet for a long moment. Then she took his hand and led him inside, to the room where she'd first touched him, where their impossible story had begun. Sit down, she said. There's something you need to know. She didn't sit across from him this time. She sat beside him, close enough that he could feel her warmth, could see the conflict playing across her features. When she spoke, her voice was different. Heavier. Like someone preparing to deliver a wound. "That officer," she began. "The one who died. The one they say I killed." Alistair waited. "He was my brother." The words landed like thunder in a silent sky. Alistair stared at her, unable to process, unable to speak. His name was Samuel. He was 10 years older than me, a soldier, everything I admired. When he was wounded at the border, I demanded to treat him myself. I thought I could save him because he was family, because love would somehow be enough. Her voice cracked. It wasn't. He died on my table, and I held him, and someone saw. Someone decided that holding a dying man meant something shameful. Alara. The scandal wasn't manufactured to destroy me. It was manufactured to bury the truth. Samuel wasn't just wounded in battle. He was poisoned. Deliberately. By someone who wanted him dead before he could testify about corruption in the supply lines. Alistair felt the world shift beneath him. Corruption. High level. Officers selling defective equipment, pocketing the difference, letting soldiers die because cheaper armor meant richer pockets. Samuel found proof. He was going to the council. She met Alistair's eyes. He never made it. The officer who accused you was part of it. They all were. They used me to bury him, to bury the truth, to make sure no one ever looked too closely at what really happened at the border that year. Tears ran down her face, but her voice stayed steady. I've spent 5 years waiting. 5 years gathering proof, building a case, watching the men who killed my brother rise higher and higher. And then you came. Alistair understood now. The letter she'd sent, the offer of treatment, the way she'd known details no physician should know. She hadn't reached out to a random general. She'd reached out to the one man powerful enough to help her expose the truth. You used me. It wasn't a question. It was a wound opening inside him, deeper than any scar her hands had found. Yes. She didn't look away. At first, I needed access to someone who could reopen the investigation, who had the authority to demand answers. You were the perfect target, isolated, desperate, willing to trust the one person who seemed to understand. Alistair rose, moved to the fire, stood with his back to her. The betrayal burned worse than anything Van had threatened. But somewhere, she continued, her voice breaking, somewhere between the first session and the storm, somewhere between your hands shaking and your eyes finally softening, it stopped being a plan. You stopped being a target. You became. She couldn't finish. Became what? The only person who's ever seen me. Not the scandal, not the disgrace, not the physician with a dead patient. Just me. And I fell in love with you, Alistair. Not because you could help me. Because you're good. Because you carry the weight of the world and still try to do what's right. Because you came back. He turned. Her face was wet, her hands clasped together like she was holding herself together by force of will. I have the proof, she said quietly. Everything. Names, dates, documents that trace the corruption all the way to the council. Including one name you know very well. Van. He was junior then, an assistant to the committee that buried the investigation. But he knew. He helped. And now he's using us to destroy you before you can ever discover what really happened at Black Ridge. Alistair froze. Black Ridge. Your 300 soldiers. The ones you carried off the mountain. They didn't die because of enemy action. They died because their equipment failed. Because someone sold them faulty armor and called it a budget decision. And Van has spent 7 years making sure no one ever found out. The room seemed to tilt. Alistair gripped the mantle, his knuckles white, his heart pounding against his ribs like a prisoner trying to escape. I was going to tell you, Alara whispered. When the time was right. When you trusted me enough to believe. But then we happened, and I couldn't risk losing you, and now. Now Van is going to destroy us both to protect himself. She nodded. Alistair stood motionless for a long moment, the fire crackling beside him, the weight of years pressing down on his shoulders. 300 men. 7 years of guilt. And all of it built on a lie. He crossed the room in 3 strides, took Alara's face in his hands, and kissed her with everything he had. "We are not going to let him win," he said against her lips. "Either of us. Not anymore." Alara spread documents across every surface: her desk, the table, the floor by the fire. Letters, ledgers, witness statements recorded in careful handwriting. Years of gathering, years of waiting, years of carrying a truth too heavy for one person to bear alone. Alistair read each page with the focus of a man preparing for battle. Names jumped out at him, some familiar, some not. Patterns emerged from the chaos. A supply contract here, a suspicious death there, a series of promotions that made sudden sense when viewed through the lens of corruption. By dawn, he understood everything. "This is enough," he said quietly, holding a sheaf of papers that could bring down half the council. "This is more than enough." Alara sat across from him, exhaustion carved into her features. It's been enough for years. The question was always who to give it to. Who could be trusted not to bury it again? "You trusted me." "I trusted you before I loved you." She met his eyes. "That's the only reason I could love you at all." Outside, the sun rose over the eastern hills, painting the room in shades of gold and amber. Somewhere in the capital, Councillor Van was preparing his case, sharpening his knives, waiting for Monday when he would finally destroy the man who stood in his way. He didn't know that the weapon had just changed hands. "We need to move fast," Alistair said, "before Van realizes what we have, before he can destroy the evidence or silence the witnesses." He stood, already planning, already calculating. There's a judge. Old, retired, completely incorruptible. He handled military cases for 40 years and never once bent to pressure. If we go to him directly, bypassing the council entirely, he'll believe you. He'll believe the evidence. And he hates Van almost as much as Van fears him. Alistair gathered the documents, carefully stacking them into a leather satchel. "But I can't be seen doing this. If Van gets wind of where I'm going, he'll move faster. We need someone else. Someone Van would never suspect." They looked at each other, and the same name formed in both their minds. Colonel Marks. The meeting happened in a barn outside the capital, far from prying eyes. Marks arrived at dusk, his face tight with tension, his hand never far from his sidearm. When Alistair stepped from the shadows, the colonel's shoulders dropped with relief, then tightened again at the sight of Alara beside him. "Sir, this is dangerous." "I know." Alistair handed him the satchel. "Inside is everything you need. Names, dates, proof of corruption stretching back 7 years. It implicates Councillor Van and at least a dozen others. It also proves that Dr. Vance was framed, that her brother was murdered, and that the 300 men I lost at Black Ridge died because someone sold them faulty armor." Mark stared at the satchel like it might explode. "Sir, this is, if this is true." "It's true. Every word." Alistair gripped his aged shoulder. "I need you to take this to Judge Harlan. Tonight. No stops, no conversations, no one else knowing what you carry. He'll know what to do." "But sir, what about you? If Van finds out you're behind this?" "By the time Van finds out, it'll be too late." Alistair glanced at Alara, standing in the shadows, her face half hidden. "We are going to give him exactly what he wants. A confession. A resignation. A public surrender that will make him think he's won." Marks frowned. "I don't understand." "You will. Now go." "And Marks," Alistair's voice softened. "Thank you. For everything." The colonel hesitated, then nodded and disappeared into the darkness, the satchel heavy against his side. Alistair turned to Alara. "You ready for this?" "No." She moved closer, took his hand. "But I'm ready to do it anyway." Monday arrived with grey skies and the threat of rain. The council chamber was packed. Officers, politicians, journalists, everyone who mattered in the capital had gathered to witness the fall of General Alistair Thorne. Van sat at the head of the committee table, his expression carefully neutral, but his eyes gleaming with anticipation. Alistair entered alone. He wore his dress uniform, medals gleaming, back straight, face unreadable. The room fell silent as he walked to the witness chair, but he didn't sit. Instead, he turned to face the council, to face Van, to face the crowd that had come to watch him bleed. "General Thorne," Van began, his voice dripping with false concern. "We've called this hearing to address serious concerns about your conduct. Concerns that touch on your fitness for command, your judgment, and your associations with individuals of questionable character." Alistair said nothing. Van gestured, and an aide distributed folders to every council member. "We have compiled evidence showing inappropriate relations with a physician previously implicated in a patient's death. Evidence of secret meetings, private communications, and a clear pattern of behavior unbecoming an officer of your rank." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Journalists scribbled furiously. "These are serious charges," Van continued. "They suggest a fundamental failure of judgment that calls into question every decision you've made, every command you've held. The committee is prepared to offer you an opportunity to resign quietly, with dignity, rather than face public." "No." The word cut through Van's speech like a blade. The council chamber went absolutely silent. "No," Alistair repeated. "I won't resign. Not today. Not ever." Van's face flickered, just for an instant, with something that might have been uncertainty. "General, the evidence against you is overwhelming. If you force a formal inquiry, the outcome will be far worse than." "You want to talk about evidence?" Alistair's voice rose, filling the chamber. "Let's talk about evidence. Let's talk about supply contracts from 7 years ago. Let's talk about defective armor that sent 300 of my soldiers to their deaths. Let's talk about a murdered officer named Samuel Vance and the sister they framed to cover it up." The room erupted. Council members shouted over each other. Journalists rushed for the exits. Van rose from his seat, face white, mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "Guards!" Van shouted. "Remove this man. He's clearly unwell, The doors at the back of the chamber swung open. Judge Harlan walked in, ancient and unbowed, flanked by military police. Behind him came Colonel Marks, and behind Marks, carrying herself with the quiet dignity of someone who had waited 5 years for this moment, came Alara Vance. "Harlan." Van's voice cracked. "What is the meaning of this?" The old judge didn't even look at him. He walked to the front of the chamber, placed a thick folder on the committee table, and spoke to the room at large. "I have here sworn testimony, financial records, and witness statements documenting a conspiracy that spans 7 years and reaches the highest levels of this council. It includes murder, fraud, and the systematic cover-up of crimes that cost good soldiers their lives." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "Councillor Van, you are named in every single page." Van's face went from white to grey. He looked around the room, searching for allies, for support, for anyone who would stand with him. He found empty stares and turned backs. "This is absurd," he tried. "This is a conspiracy, eh?" Councillor Van. The head of the council, a woman who had remained silent through the entire proceeding, finally spoke. "You will sit down and be silent, or you will be removed." Van Saturday. The hearing lasted 3 days. By the end, Van and a dozen others were in custody, their careers destroyed, their freedom forfeit. Alara's name was cleared completely, her brother's murder finally acknowledged, her years of exile revealed as the injustice they'd always been. But for Alistair and Alara, the real battle was just beginning. The world now knew about them. The secret was out, splashed across every newspaper, discussed in every corner of the capital. The general and the physician. The hero and the scandal. Their love story became public property, analyzed and judged and turned into something neither of them recognized. Some called it romantic. Some called it reckless. Everyone had an opinion. But no one had the right to touch it anymore. They met one last time, in the place where it all began. Alara's clinic stood quiet in the evening light, the garden beginning to show the first signs of spring. She waited by the gate, watching him approach, wondering if this would be hello or goodbye. "You're famous now," she said as he drew near. "So are you." He stopped before her, close enough to touch but not touching. Not yet. How does it feel? Strange. Like waking up from a long dream and finding the world completely different. She studied his face, searching for answers he hadn't yet given. What happens now? Alistair looked toward the hills, toward the capital hidden beyond them, toward the life he'd spent decades building. The council wants me to stay. They say I'm needed, that the Empire can't afford to lose me now. He paused. I told them I'd think about it. And have you? He turned back to her. I've thought about nothing else. The silence stretched between them, filled with everything they couldn't say. The world had taken their secret, but it hadn't taken their choice. Not yet. I can't ask you to wait for me, Alistair said quietly. I don't know how long this will take, or what it will look like on the other side. I don't know if there's a version of this where we get to be ordinary, where we get to just be. Alara stepped closer. I've waited 5 years for justice. I've waited my whole life for someone who saw me the way you do. I can wait a little longer. But... No. She pressed a finger to his lips. No more buts. No more sacrifices. You've given enough. We've both given enough. Her eyes held his, steady and sure. Go do what you need to do. Be the general they need you to be. And when it's done, come home. Home. The word landed in his chest like a key turning in a lock. He pulled her close, held her against him, breathed her in like a man who'd finally found air after years underwater. I will, he whispered. I'll come home. 6 months later, on a quiet evening in autumn, a horse appeared on the road to the Eastern Clinic. Alara watched from the garden, her hands covered in soil, her heart in her throat. He rode slowly this time, no urgency, no desperation. Just a man coming home at the end of a long journey. He dismounted at the gate and walked toward her, and she saw the difference immediately. The weight he'd carried for so long had finally lightened. The shadows behind his eyes had retreated. He moved like someone who'd made peace with his past and found room for a future. You're early, she said. I'm done being late. He stopped before her, close enough to touch. The council released me. Officially this time. Honorable retirement, they called it. Said I'd earned the right to choose my own battles from now on. And what battles have you chosen? He reached out, slowly, giving her time to move away if she wanted. She didn't move. His hand cupped her cheek, warm and steady, without even a hint of a tremor. Just one, he said. The only one that matters. She leaned into his touch, closed her eyes, and for the first time in years, let herself believe that this was real. The world would always watch them. The story would always follow. They would never be ordinary, never be anonymous, never be free of the past that had brought them together. But they would be together. And in the end, that was enough. In the garden, as the sun set over the hills, General Alistair Thorne and Dr. Alara Vance held each other without fear, without secrets, without anything left to hide. The one person he was forbidden to touch had saved him from himself. And the world would never need to know another thing.